Hey everybody, thanks for watching A Guy Doing Stuff. I'm Adam, and today I'm going to be making the gunnels for my cedar strip canoe. The hull is a fiberglass shell now, so it's time to start working on the trim. The trim consists of the gunnels, the decks, the seats, and the yoke. There are two main things I think about when I'm designing my trim. The first is I want everything to complement the natural, sleek, and tapered look of the canoe. I try to avoid like a blocky look as much as possible, and I add little fancy touches here and there to make everything look nice. The second important thing for me is I put an epoxy seal on all the exposed wood. It's the same art composite epoxy I use when I'm fiberglassing my hull, but I just paint it right onto the trim. I just like the idea of having a waterproof seal on all the wood on the canoe. A lot of the steps I take when I'm making and installing my trim are guided by these two principles. Gunnels are the hardwood rails that go around the rim of the canoe. There's an inner gunnel and an outer gunnel that sandwich the edge of the hull on each side of the canoe, so you're going to need to make 4 sticks total. I'm using ash for my gunnels. It's tough finding ash boards that are more than 10 feet long, so you're probably going to have to scarf joint 2 boards together to make the full length of your canoe. I'm going to glue 1 scarf joint that I'll cut all 4 gunnels out of, so I got boards that are well over 4 inches wide. I clamp my boards together and cut an angle off the ends. When I cut them at the same time like this, it helps me keep the same angle on both of them so my joint is a good fit. Gluing a scarf joint on boards this long can get tricky to clamp. It's always smart to do a dry run before you glue, and you're going to want to put some plastic wrap down so you don't accidentally glue your boards to the table. I mix art composites 2-part epoxy resin and hardener and brush it onto the ends. Then I add some cotton fiber into the mixture and brush that over the wet glue. I do it like this because the epoxy mixture soaks into the wood better, but then when I add the cotton fiber, it strengthens the final joint. After the glue dries, I run the board through the planer to clean it up a bit, then rip 2 1x1 strips for the outer gunnels. I plane those down to 3/4 inch thick and 7/8 inch wide. Then I put a small bevel on the underside of them to make them look a little less blocky, and it saves a little bit of weight. I'll set these aside now until I'm ready to put them on the canoe. I'm making scuppered inner gunnels. Scuppers are little spacer blocks you put on the inside of the inner gunnels every couple inches so that water can drain out of the boat when you turn it upside down. I planed a 2-inch wide scarf jointed ash from before to 5/8 of an inch thick. I'm going to glue the scuppers on at this width, then rip it in half so my 2 inner gunnels match exactly. I cut up a bunch of walnut scupper blanks to 2 inches wide, 1/4 inch thick, and about 3 inches long. Before I glue them on, I'm going to cut coves on all the ends so the scupper holes will end up being rounded. I set up a fence on the router table and use the same cove bit I used to mill the cedar strips to route coves on the ends of all my scuppers. I also make 2 3-foot long scuppers to put on the ends to give myself some cushion when I'm mounting them onto the boat. This is what the scuppers look like before I mount them. You're going to need a bunch of clamps to glue them, so rather than buying 50 little squeeze clamps, I bought a piece of PVC pipe and I cut it up like this to make these little homemade clamps. I paint the epoxy glue onto the face of the ash. The spaces where the scuppers aren't glued are now going to be encapsulated with clear coat epoxy. I paint the face of the scuppers, then add the cotton fiber mixed epoxy glue to the face of the scuppers, then clamp the scuppers onto the gunnel. I use a 2-inch long stick to make sure all the scuppers are evenly spaced. I put the longer scuppers on each end, and I make it about 1 foot longer than what it needs to be, and I'll cut off the ends when I actually install them. As the epoxy dries, I add a couple more coats where the exposed wood will be. It's a lot easier coating this area with epoxy now compared to when the gunnels are mounted on the canoe because the holes are so small. After the epoxy cures, I rough up the clear coat with 220 grit so it'll accept the final varnish when the time comes. Then the last step is to rip this into 2 3/4 inch strips on the table saw. If you do it right, your 2 inner gunnels should match each other exactly. So I had this video all the way done and I was ready to upload it, and I was working on my next video where I'm attaching the gunnels onto the hull, and when I was trying to put one of the inner gunnels on, it snapped in half at the scarf joint. So I was pretty upset, and I'm going to now make all the gunnels over again because my scarf joint actually wasn't at the proper ratio for what a scarf joint should be. You should have a 6:1 ratio from length to width for every inch wide your scarf joint is, it should be 6 inches long. Mine was more like a 2-to-1 ratio. So the good news is I don't have to film it the second time around. I'll just say make the right ratio for your scarf joint now, and you guys can learn from my mistakes. Yeah, so thanks for watching.